The Gospel according to Mark, the 6th chapter. As Jesus and his disciples began to attract attention, Mark recalls the story of John the Baptist's martyrdom. Like John, Jesus and his disciples will also suffer at the hands of those opposed to the gospel of salvation. The reading begins at verse 14. King Herod heard of the disciples preaching, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying, "John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him." But others said, "It's Elijah." And others said, "It's a prophet, like one of the prophets of old." But when Herod heard of it, he said, "John, whom I beheaded, has been raised." For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, who had bound him, put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. John had been telling Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." And so Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him. But of course she could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests, and the king said to the girl, "Ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it." And he solemnly swore to her, "Whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half of my kingdom." Well, she went out and said to her mother, "What should I ask for?" Her mother replied, "How about the head of John the Baptizer?" Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, "I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter." Well, the king was deeply grieved, and yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he did not want to refuse her. So immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. And he went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. And then the girl gave it to her mother. When the disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ.
Well, isn't this a pleasant reading? Who doesn't like a good beheading story, right? When you decided that it would be a good idea to come to worship, to spend some time refocusing your life around this spiritual practice, what did you come to hear? What did you come expecting? I suspect you came to hear words of hope and words of grace, words of love. I suspect that you came to hear the gospel, or more literally, the good news pronouncement, the good news of God's love for this world and for you. If I'm right, if what I have said is true, oh man, then we have a serious problem. This section of the good news pronouncement that we heard contains no good news. There are no words of hope to be found. There are no words of grace or words of love. So, what do we do with these words? If you have no idea, well, that's okay. It seems that the gospel writers writing after Mark didn't know what to do with the story of John's death either. The gospel writer Matthew, he shortens the story considerably. And Luke, he omits it completely. And I suspect that we could follow suit and find a story with better words to focus on. But if we did that, then I think we would miss hearing these for what they are. We would miss hearing something that I personally really need to hear and desperately hope to find when I go to worship. Yes, I need to hear words of forgiveness, words of grace, mercy, and love, but none of these good news words means very much. In fact, they seem cheap if they are not accompanied by honest words, words that speak to the reality of life, words that resonate with my lived experiences and don't hold back from naming that which needs to be named. Today's reading does not contain good news, but it does contain honest words. Well, let me take you on a quick trip through history. In 63, before the Common Era, the Roman Empire conquered the Jewish homeland, and as their standard practice for ruling conquered nations, the empire appointed local people of the community, who typically were wealthy, part of the, aristocracy, to rule on Rome's behalf. These newly appointed kings were given the freedom to rule their population at will, as long as they were loyal to Rome and maintained order, and most importantly, collected the annual tribute to be paid to the empire. It was really quite a brilliant strategy to maintain foreign control. Power, riches, prestige were given to people who promised to toe the line. Eventually, the empire appointed a king of the Jews. His name was Herod, known to history as Herod the Great, although his Jewish subjects knew him by, well, let's just say a different name, Herod the Monstrous. Living conditions under his rule became deplorable for those not of wealth. He made huge improvements to the city. He built the great Jewish temple, but did so by using what amounted to slave labor. He kept the peace through intimidation, murder, and violence. He paid Rome's annual tribute by taking from those who barely had enough as it was. He had 3 sons, and he taught them well. He taught them how to survive. He taught them how to be successful, how to win. He taught them how to rule as an agent of the empire through force and intimidation. And after Herod the Great died, the Jewish homeland was divided, and his 3 sons, Herod Antipas, Philip, and Archelaus, took over. It is this Herod Antipas that is present in Mark's story that we heard today, a Roman appointed king who takes his brother's wife. It is this Herod who is criticized by a poor Jewish prophet and mystic, calling people to reorient themselves to God's rule. It is this Herod who, upon his wife's request, silences John's criticism by locking him away. It's this Herod who throws a party and makes a promise to a woman whose request he may not want to honor, but knowing how to play the game, knowing how to survive, knowing what must happen to keep power and honor and control, he upholds his drunken oath, displays his might in front of his guests, and signs an order of execution. John is killed, and so his story comes to an end. And this is where the story we read today comes to an end. So, what do you think about that? The story is not good news, but at least it's honest. The story is about power, it's about survival, it's about success, it's about wealth, it's about control, and using whatever means necessary to maintain that structure. Through this story, Mark tells the truth not only about his time, but also about all of human history, our time as well. It won't take me that long flipping through the stories of my news app to encounter the themes of this story being played out all over the place. Here's one on how the elderly, often on fixed incomes, are being targeted by scammers in a variety of different ways. Here is one on the abuse of power of college professors in sexual relationships with students. Here is one about the abduction and murder of a Minneapolis real estate agent. Stories where power and authority have been abused abound in our world. The names and circumstances of these stories change, but the story itself, the essence of the story, it remains the same. All of us know what people are capable of when power, money, and prestige are on the line. The temptation is to say that, well, this is just the way the world is. We may not like it, but well, what else is there? What are we going to do? We might as well just learn to live with it and how to play the game. If we just took Mark's story of John the Baptist in isolation, I guess really that would be the conclusion. I think that's what I would come to. However, Mark's gospel, it goes on. For Mark, this is the way of the world, but it's not the whole story. Mark's good news proclamation goes on to say that Jesus shows us that there is something more, something beyond the heartaches and intrigue and tragedy of Herod, and everyone like him across time and space. There's something more. At the very heart of the good news that I suspect you came to hear is a confession that Jesus came to point us to God's passion, God's hope, God's way of life, which amounts to more than mere survival, more than success. Jesus came to help us to imagine that there is more to this life than we can perceive. Jesus came to offer us abundant life, living deeply connected with God. Jesus came so that we could have a better ending to our story and the story of the world than we can imagine or construct on our own. And so, when your marriage is ending, or when you've lost your job, or you fear your child will never speak to you again, or you're pretty sure that your friend has betrayed you, or you think you may just have screwed up the one close relationship that meant something to you, then the possibility of another ending, a good ending, is not just good news, but it's the best news that you can imagine. As a biblical scholar said, the story of John the Baptist's death is the one scene in all of Mark's gospel in which Jesus makes no appearance. Did you notice that? He goes on to say that that's not by accident, because apart from God's promises, this is about all we can expect. Good intentions gone bad, fearless candor rewarded with imprisonment, the triumph of the powerful over the powerless. And so the world goes. But as honest as Mark wants to be about the story of the world, he wants even more to testify to the story of God's great love for the world. Today, I suspect that you have come to hear words of grace, mercy, love, peace, words about God who is passionate for all of creation. Jesus points to this. He points to this hope. He enacts it with his words of hope and promise. But these must be heard alongside truthful words, honest words about us, words that resonate with our experiences and what we do. When we are honest about the world in which we live, God's words of grace, love, and mercy, they take on a renewed importance. They become more than just good ideas or fluff, more than just thoughts in our head. They become words that change us, and they change the world. They enable us to see and participate in God's desires, passions, and concerns for all people. This is who we are. This is what we do. This is the good news that we hear today. Thanks be to God for that. Amen.